Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have you. This is Lucinda Vakura. I'm the Business Development Manager with the Alford Group. I know most of you are familiar with the Alford Group, but for those of you who are not, the Alford Group is a national full-service consulting firm, and we specialize in the nonprofit and social sectors. We offer services in fundraising, strategic planning, corporate partnership strategy, data analytics, and much more. Our main goal is to provide guidance and to provide tools and structures that empower organizations to have the greatest impact possible. So on behalf of the entire team here at the Alford Group, welcome to our final webinar in our fall webinar series. If you were not able to join us for previous webinars, you're in luck. We have recordings of all of our webinars and they can be accessed for free on our website. So today's webinar is titled, Prepare Your Donor Database for Year-End Fundraising. And our presenters today include Wendy Hatch and Mary Hackett. Wendy is a vice president here at the Alford Group. Wendy has more than 30 years of experience in the public and nonprofit sectors, both as a consultant, but also as a development executive. So prior to the Alford Group, Wendy served as the executive director for the Northwest Kidney Foundation. And joining Wendy today is Mary Hackett. Mary is an associate vice president with the Alford Group, and Mary is our data rock star. She works with nonprofits across the country and across sectors to guide them in using data analytics to really drive strategic and impactful outcomes. So before I hand things over to Wendy and Mary today, I have just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is approved for 1 CFRE credit point for those of you who are seeking CFRE certification or recertification. The webinar is being recorded, and like I mentioned, we post all of our webinar recordings on our website. So later today, you'll receive an email from the Alford Group with a link to the recording, as well as the slides from today's presentation, and then also just a very short survey asking for your feedback. And by short, I mean it's like 4 questions, so it's very short. And we welcome all feedback from today's presentation. So everyone is joining us in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. We will have time at the end of the presentation to take questions. If you have a question at any time during the webinar, please type your question using the Q&A function. And you can find the Q&A icon at the top of your screen. We will answer as many questions as possible during the question and answer section at the end of today's presentation. And lastly, we invite you to join us on Twitter throughout the webinar using the hashtag NPOStrength. We will be live tweeting, and we invite you to join the conversation there as well. So with that, let's get started. I'm now going to turn things over to Wendy, who's going to walk us through the agenda and kick us off today.
Thanks, Lucinda. Hi, everybody. Mary and I are really happy to be with you today. Thanks for joining us. When we first began planning for this, we shared some memories of our own year-end experiences and agreed that on the one hand, it's a really exciting time in a development office, and on the other hand, it's incredibly busy and often challenging. I remember at the Northwest Kidney Foundation not being able to wait the 30 minutes it took for my organization's accounting department to open and copy the checks before bringing them down to our office so we could begin processing them. So when I knew the mail came in, I would walk down to the copy center and I'd sort of stand off to the side and peek over their shoulders to see who the checks were from and for how much. And then with great excitement, I would walk back down to our office and announce how tall the stacks of checks were. We measured them by inches. It was a 1-inch day or a 2-inch day, or maybe 2 stacks of 5 inches. And each day, my gift processor would paste a smile on her face and say, "Oh, that's terrific." And then she'd kind of shrink into her chair a little bit because she knew the amount of work it meant for her to process all those gifts. So marshaling the power of your donor database to help streamline this process of entering and acknowledging and reporting all those gifts is our primary discussion today. We are going to recognize the reality of year-end first, how crazy, how busy it can be, the hustle bustle of the season, both in fundraising and in most of our own lives. We're going to share why year-end continues to be one of the most important times of the year for fundraising, and offer some specific ideas and tips to get your database ready for the onslaught of gifts that we all hope to get for this year. And we're going to leave you with some suggestions for using the data and insights you will gain this year-end to set the stage for even more successful fundraising in year-end 2019. I know it kind of hurts my head to be thinking about next year's year-end, but the earlier we can analyze our data and plan for next year, the better. Okay, let's get started. Lucinda is going to initiate 3 polls throughout our presentation. I encourage you to participate. It's just a simple click. The first one is particularly important because it tells us what donor database you are using. This will help us tailor our comments to best meet your needs. Are you using Bloomerang or Razor's Edge eTapestry, Donor Perfect, Little Green Light, Salesforce, or another donor database?
Yep, and it looks like people are still voting, so we'll just give it a couple more seconds. About 75% of the people that are on the line right now have already voted, so if you want to take a second to vote. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results.
Now we have a pretty clear, similar number of Razor's Edge eTapestry and others. So we can assume that Razor's Edge and eTapestry is the one that's used most predominantly with the people that are on the call. So moving on, as I said earlier, year-end is typically very busy for most nonprofits. Not all of them, but most. And it's funny how many in our profession even capitalize it. It isn't just the year end or the end of the year, but it's like a holiday. It's year end with a capital Y and a capital E. So just look at what happens at year end in many organizations. Even half of these activities might send the best of us around the bend for a little while. You might have 1 or 2 direct mail appeals, and then a follow-up appeal to those who didn't respond to the first 2. You might be using year-end to do your LIBUNT and your SciBunt mailings. You've got to get all your e-initiatives up and running, including getting your giving pages ready to go, launching your online campaign. Maybe you're sending emails and follow-up to your direct mail appeals, or sending direct mail letters and follow-up to your email appeals. You're also teeing up all your social media channels for year-end push and activating your ambassadors to get the word out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you have a presence. You're probably also trying to get your quarterly newsletter printed and sending out other impact reports. Some of you are trying to plan best how to integrate Giving Tuesday in with everything else that you're doing. And hopefully, you're making some personal solicitation and stewardship visits over the holiday season. And then just because some of us in this profession are true gluttons for punishment, we hold our signature fundraising event in the fall as well. So all of this, even if you're only doing a quarter of it, requires really careful planning and timing and hard work, and the need to develop consistent complementary themes across all of your fundraising channels. Hopefully, all of this work results in mountains of gifts, or inches of gifts as we measured it where I worked. But it also means mountains of work too. Your gift entry staff are going to have increased levels of gift entry processing. They're going to have more acknowledgement emails and letters to get out. They're going to have more reports to produce. And it doesn't just mean work for them, but for the development officers as well. As some of the circles in the graphic show, you will be, or should be, connecting with your donors this time of year, making thank you calls, holding holiday parties, delivering poinsettias and candy to your major donors. and also many of you will have to officially close your books for the end of the year. All this, not to mention that you and your staff would like to spend a little of the holiday season with your own family and friends. It's funny now, most of us at the Alford group came from development shops where year-end was typically very busy, very crazy. We all often work the last 2 weeks of December, just like you. But now as consultants, none of our clients want to meet with us during that time frame. When we suggest scheduling our regular weekly team meeting, most of them kind of roll their eyes and say something like, "Are you kidding? I'll see you in January." But honestly, if you're going to have a problem, it's a good problem to have, getting an abundance of gifts at year end. So we're going to do our second poll now to turn our attention to why year-end fundraising is so important. How much of your overall revenue comes from year-end? Our options are 10 to 25%, 25 to 50%, 50% or more, or it's fair to say, I'm just not sure.
We're getting lots of responses, which is really great. And this is all anonymous, of course. So we'll leave it open for just a couple more seconds while people vote. Looks like about 70% of everyone have voted. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Oh, interesting results. So let's go to the next slide and I can indicate why that is interesting. There have been many studies done on the percentage of revenue that comes in at year end. And the statistics pretty dramatically demonstrate that year end is very important. When asked the percentage of gifts in these studies, the answers literally range from 0 to 100. But on average, they say that 50% of nonprofits receive the majority of their annual donations October through December. So our survey show that a large percentage of you do not receive that much money at year end. The studies go on to say that 30% occurs in December, and approximately 10% of annual giving comes in the last 3 days of the year. And one study suggested that 33% of all donations made in December occur on the 31st of the month. And certainly the opportunity to give online has increased these year-end percentages in recent years. But talk about last minute. You know that old saying, procrastination on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine? Well, unfortunately, it kind of does in fundraising. No wonder we're all working that last week of the year. No wonder I hovered over the shoulders of our accounting staff to see how much money was coming in. And no wonder our gift entry coordinators' back ached a bit at the end of the day. So even though our statistics from this survey were a little bit lower than what the national statistics show, it still indicates that year-end is critically important for an organization to meet its budget. But more importantly, to garner the resources we need to meet the needs of those we're serving in the year to come. So beyond the sheer volume of gifts many organizations receive in October, November, and December, there's a few other statistics that point toward the incredible importance of steps that you can take to maximize your year-end fundraising. The first box reflects studies that indicate that a huge number of donors, 80%, give larger gifts at year-end. So these studies presuppose that these donors do give multiple gifts, with the largest one at the end of the year. But you can certainly use the data that you're getting on your donors to understand their giving preferences and really lead them to their best possible and largest gift at year-end. The second box shows the percentage of organizations that make touches during their year-end giving window and prior to their solicitations. A staggering statistic to me is what is not on this slide. While some of the studies indicate that 60% of organizations make 1 to 3 touches throughout their year-end effort, which is great, but it's troubling to me that almost 28% make 0 touches. No newsletter, no impact statement, no thank you email, nothing. Think of the possibilities if those organizations added just one cultivation step during that time frame. And I think the last box kind of represents what those of us in the profession already know in our hearts. That people give during the holiday season because they're thankful for their own blessings and they want to give back to those things they care about. So in a way, some of our work is already done with that natural tendency. So now we're going to do our third poll. We'd like to know when you started your planning for this year end. Did you start in the springtime, during the summer, in the last couple months, or, and remember, this is anonymous, so be honest, no judgment. Maybe you plan to start as soon as you get off of this webinar.
Great, there's a lot of action on this one, so I'm going to keep it open for a couple more seconds. Okay, looks like the majority of people on the line have the chance to vote, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Good for you. A lot of you have gotten a good head start. We know, that it's hard to focus on year end when it's still the middle of the year, the summer or even the fall, especially when you're trying to meet that quarter's needs. A number of the studies indicate that about 50% of nonprofits begin their year-end planning in October. So many of you are well ahead of that. Kudos to you. A few of you might be feeling a little behind the October 8 ball. But even if you're just getting started, you're still among the majority of nonprofits according to these studies. So consider yourself right on time. And as I indicated a few minutes ago, studies say that on average 10% of the revenue comes in the last few days of December. So there's still plenty of time to kind of get ready for that final wave of gifts. The point today is that it isn't too late to develop some year-end strategies, particularly with your donor database, to get ready to handle the year-end gifts that you hope you'll get in the most efficient way. Next, Mary is going to talk about some very concrete action steps that you can take right now to make your year-end a little easier and a little more efficient, and hopefully a little less stressful. She's going to discuss your database preparation and your gift entry, providing strategies and tips to deal with the flow of gifts. We'll talk about streamlining and speeding up your acknowledgement process while still being very thoughtful about what is meaningful to your donors. About building reports to provide real-time results of your year-end and then using the metrics of those results to boost giving this year. And also then discuss how your database can help inform strategies for tailoring your stewardship efforts personal in a very meaningful way. She's going to leave you with some strategies for using this year's results to plan an even more fruitful year-end next year. So take it away, Mary.
Thanks, Wendy. This is really about building systems now that will help you manage the hustle and bustle that Wendy just went through. And I encourage you to think about your future self. Think about you sitting at your desk in the second week of December. And what we do and talk about today is all about being kind to that future self. So just remember that as we go through. So when you put the time in now, you really set yourself up for success and efficiency. And we'll really start with database preparation and gift entry. And you can see the box on the right, that is not a typo. This graphic, clearly they didn't plan ahead for their plan ahead sign. So the first thing you can do to really set yourself up is run an address append. It's important that your mail actually gets to the donors, and running an address finder or some sort of append with your mail vendor It's a cost-effective way to really track your constituents. The cost is, it teeters between, $150 and $300, which is a small price to pay to have all your donors' correct mailing addresses. And the process is not long. I noticed that many of you are using Razor's Edge, eTapestry, Donor Source, and each one of those has a utility, the built-in functionality to submit your data. You can do it straight from the database. It's returned in typically, 24 hours or less. So it's a great way to just get your addresses and your donors' demographic information up to date. The second thing is to take a look at your addressees and salutations and update those that need it. You have a much better chance of someone opening your email or your mail if it's addressed properly. Thirdly, look at your inactive, deceased, and no valid address records. And especially pay attention to those deceased. Who's not marked deceased that should be marked deceased? The holidays it's a very emotional time, and worst case scenario is when a widow or widower receives correspondence and it's addressed to their deceased spouse. So really pay attention to those codes. And next, you'll want to fix your duplicates. I know, it might be your Everest. I've often been in jobs where it was my Everest, but it's important work. And I've learned with many data cleanups that really the best way to tackle it is to produce bite-sized lists that you can actually digest and dedupe. So instead of, using your Razor's Edge duplicate utility, maybe run some queries and look at a year's worth of donors and fix those duplicates. And then when you're done with that, pat yourself on the back, but then go to the next year. And that way you're not looking at, hundreds or thousands of constituents, but you're also, this is a budget saving tactic. You're also not mailing to, multiple pieces to one household. You'll want to inactivate all your old gift codes. I'm often surprised when I look into databases and the drop downs for some of the gift entry are rows and rows of old funds and appeals. I was in a database just the other day and looking at some gifts, and the first option for the campaign was the 2003 annual fund. And I thought, I really thought no words, but anything that's not in use should completely be inactivated, and that way it speeds up, it shortens the drop down and speeds up your gift entry. And then of course add your new codes. And then lastly, for database preparation and gift entry, record the appeals on constituent records as they go out. So we all have the best intentions. We do want to track, who's receiving which appeal and which package and which campaign are they participating in, what are they responding to, what are they not responding to. And the only way you can really get that data is if you record every appeal on the record. So when you query or report for an email list or a mailing list, use that query to then, whether it's for Salesforce through the data loader or Razor's Edge for the importing functionality or the global change, add the appeal to those records as soon as you pull the mailing list, and then it's done. It doesn't hang out on your to-do list, it's just done. So those are some ways to quickly be a little bit more efficient in your gift entry. And I know with the survey, the total revenue for year end, it might not be 50% for your organization, it might not be 75%, it might be 15%, but that's not measuring the volume. So even though it might not be a huge percentage of your revenue, it's still literally a mountain of gifts that need to get entered. So let's turn our sight a little bit donor facing and look at the acknowledgement process. So first and foremost, update your letters now. You know, if you have to work with your communications person or your program people to really, you know, put some mission-centered content in there, update them now so you don't have to fiddle with it when you're in the throes of gift entry. And really think about what's in that letter. So when someone opens their acknowledgement, will they think, oh, this letter probably went to everybody? Or does the letter evoke an emotional response? Does it look like this woman on the screen? She's clearly reading something that's moved her. And you never know, that donor that's moved might make another gift before year end. Secondly, use the functionality in your database to generate and automate your acknowledgement process. So the databases, most databases, and I know the big three that are on this call, the Razor's Edge, Donor Perfect, and Salesforce, those databases have robust functionality for quickly generating acknowledgements. But it's quite cumbersome to actually set it up. And I know that, and you probably know that as well. So oftentimes, people don't take the time to set it up because it is cumbersome. But you know what else is cumbersome? Is exporting the data into Excel and merging it into Word and printing those documents and merging your labels and your letters and your envelopes. Like, these are things that can be automated. So spend an hour or two now to set up that functionality. Thirdly, you know, get some volunteers to help you stuff some letters. You know, with an increased volume of gifts, there used to just sit a stack of letters on my desk that would need to be stuffed. So schedule your volunteers to help, and that helps get the letters out quickly, which is critical if you want to stand out among all the other nonprofits that one donor might be giving to. You want that acknowledgement to arrive first. And then lastly, get what you need. This goes back to being kind to your future self. Worst case scenario is going to get stamps, like go to the post office on December 20th. It's not great. I've done it. You don't want to do it. So that's a little bit to kind of get your acknowledgement process tightened up as much as possible. And so we've talked about getting gifts in, and we've talked about getting letters out. But there's also another big element that is not often talked about, and that is reports and metrics. To produce any kind of real-time reports, it's critical to get your gifts in quickly and properly. And I would urge you to go ahead and build some of those reports out now before, you know, the volume of gifts start to come in. And just like Wendy was saying that, you know, she would kind of hover around the accountants and peek over their shoulders, I know that my bosses used to do the same thing, like how much have we brought in today, and how much has this appeal, you know, brought in. And so if you build those reports now, they'll just be ready to rock and roll at year end. And some of the things you might consider measuring are, you know, number of gifts, the average gift, response rates, and then, you know, upgrading and downgrading and how that's faring with each of your appeals. But there's more for reports and metrics. So I would urge you to be very proactive in putting data in front of the right people and at the right time. So I know you have to get your gifts in, then you pull your reports, but it's also about having the time to react to that data. So only when you have data can you know if you need to course correct your year-end campaign. So there's a couple different ways that you can do that. And the first is produce and review a weekly report. But don't do it on a Friday, because Fridays, it's the holidays, and you know, somebody might take the day off, and donors might be going out of town for the weekend, and you just lose steam, because then you have to wait 2 days to even review the report with somebody and, you know, talk through it. Do it on a Wednesday. because then you have some time at the beginning of the week to get all your gifts in. And then you can, if you need to pull additional lists, but you can at least react to the report. And also anticipate and provide information that people haven't asked you for. Like really think about, would my gift officers, would they appreciate a list of their constituents who haven't made an annual gift this year? They might be, cultivating a major gift, but should they look at that list as well? Like really think about everybody in your office and what would help them be successful. And then the last thing is, because you're running this cadence of weekly reports and you and your team can react to what's happening in your year-end campaign, you would then have the time to course correct. And your report should really answer these questions. And there's probably several others, but these are the top ones for me. Are my fundraising efforts producing the results I want? Do I need to produce an additional deal to long-standing donors who haven't yet given to the year-end campaign? Have all my $1,000 donors from last fiscal year renewed, or do they need a call from my ED or board chair? And then lastly, have I given my entire donor pool ways to participate in this campaign? So it's really about getting gifts in, building the reports so you can see the landscape, and then you can see what's working and what's not working. So the other thing about getting gifts in quickly is really being able to offer that thoughtful stewardship that helps you stand out and that lets donors know that you appreciate them. So I found this ad in the Penny Saver in Springville, New York, which is outside of Buffalo. And it's this woman, Jessie Vance, and she took an ad out in the Penny Saver and she said, "Thank you to the kind people who sent notes and cards for my 90th birthday, my sincere thanks. When conversation is hindered by hearing loss, the written word is extra appreciated." So I thought that was a really great example of it's not only what you communicate and what you put in your letters, it's how you communicate it, and the method matters. So, if one of your top donors, has eyesight problems, you might use a bigger font in his or her thank you letter. I mean, just these little niceties that they really are thoughtful and make a big difference. But at the same time, you're also dealing with this volume of gifts and donors. So you can work now to set up some queries and reports that will help offer really tailored, customized, and thoughtful stewardship. So maybe you have a list that you run that's first-time donors that have given $250 or more. Donors who have reached some sort of milestone in their giving. So is this their 5th anniversary with us? Is it their 10th consecutive year? Or if there's any significant increases in giving. So if you know that Jane Miller makes a $100 gift every December, but this December she sent in a $500 gift, she should show up on a list somewhere. And these lists should be run and kept in front of the right people, whether it's board members who are going to make thank you calls, or executive directors that can help write a handwritten note. These are important people to steward. And then of course, treat your new donors very special. Treat your recovered donors better, but treat your retained donors the best. They are loyal to you, and you should be loyal to them. So if you have 5 minutes at the end of the day and don't want to start a new project and think, I'm just going to make a thank you call to someone who gave recently, choose a retained donor because of their loyalty. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we've talked about metrics, we've talked about coding, we've talked about tightening up processes. But at December 31st at midnight, your work is not done. Although I feel like our work is never done, but which is not done. Because in January, I would sit down and have an honest, eyes wide open discussion about year end. And this is the anecdotal thing, items. So sit down with your team and think about what effort of ours completely flopped, and talk about it. Why did it flop? Well, there could be several reasons, but also what went well. Were there any surprises? Did volunteers say they would help but never really found the time because it was the holidays? Did a board member surprise you by offering to make calls? Were the right reports produced, and were they timely enough that we could course correct? And was the donor experience special, or did we run out of time for the personal touches? Like really, really think through how it went. And that's the anecdotal side of things. Then you want to pair the anecdotal with your data. So I would urge you to build a matrix like this. And I'm going to get my laser pointer. So what we're looking at here is a matrix of all year-end appeals, the number of donors and the response rate, the hard costs, no soft costs like, salaries or like software, just really the hard costs, the postage, the letterhead, things like that. The revenue that it brought in, the ROI, and the median gift. So if you look at year-end mailing 1, that brought in 256 donors, which was a 4% response rate. Now it cost $2,100 to produce and mail, but brought in $28,000, which is not bad. So you spent $1 to bring in $13.33. And the median gift is pretty good too, $110. So if you look at this in an isolated way, this is a successful mailing. But then if you turn your sight to year-end mailing number 2, it brought in 312 donors, and the response rate doubled to 8%. It cost the organization half as much to send, but brought in double the revenue. So this mailing, the organization spent $1 to bring in $33, and then the median gift went up $25. So it's important to really look at it side by side, because if you look at it individually, it's hard to see where the biggest bang for your buck is. And then I would look at what was successful. So this year-end, this double drop, the second drop, what was special about it? Did it hit on what day did it hit households, and was that a significant day? What was the content of that letter? Did a program person help you write it, or was it a story about, really impact-driven client that you serve? Like what was the secret sauce in that second drop? And then of course you can just look at each of the other appeals that have gone out, and you can really assess what has the highest ROI, what has the highest response rate, just looking to see how your year end did. And then in this example, Giving Tuesday, it didn't really work out for this organization. They brought in 16 donors. It was a 1% response rate. It cost them $350 to bring in $250. So they actually took a loss on investment. And the median gift is the smallest in this data set. So we had an example of what went well. Then you kind of unpack what didn't go well. Who responded and what helped them to respond? Was the message not broad enough? So it's okay for certain tactics to fail, but you have to know that they failed so you can evolve that particular tactic. And really there's two choices here. You can evolve your Giving Tuesday strategy and say, okay, we're going to spend $500 and we're going to really try to make it work, and we're going to, do A, B, and C. The second option is to say, Giving Tuesday isn't hitting home with our donors, and we're going to take that $350 and do a special solicitation or a special stewardship piece around Thanksgiving, or so it at least allows you to make decisions. So what we've done is we've sat down and talked about what went well and how you and your staff made it, and what was good and what was bad, and how did that all feel. Then you have your data, and with those two elements you can build a successful strategy for your fiscal year 19. So you're just going to take all that data and put it to good use. So if you know that certain content in one of these appeals was wildly successful, and that area of your mission clearly inspires your donor base, then you can think about those messages and collect quotes all year long instead of doing it toward the end of the year. So with that, we are eager to answer your questions and help out in any way we can to help you have a automated, as much as possible, data entry acknowledgement process, and just be kind to your future self. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Lucinda, who's going to go through our questions.
Great. Well, thank you both, Mary and Wendy, for great information. That was extremely helpful. And we do have a number of questions that I want to get to, but I want to start with one that I think is really applicable, and I think a question that we get often. And there's some context here, but essentially the question is, do you have advice or tips on sending donor appeals to donors who have already given significantly this year? So the context is, would you advise an organization about sending an annual appeal request to someone who contributed maybe through a sponsorship or maybe at an event, but they've already given a significant gift this year? Is there a threshold of time you should wait before you send an appeal? Is there a general rule of thumb about the dollar amount? If it's this amount, do you send an appeal, but if it's over that amount, do you hold off? Do either of you have tips around that?
Well, I'll start, Mary. It sounds like the people that you're talking about are isolated. You know who they are. You know the amount that they've given and when they've given. And I would say that each one of those circumstances has to be evaluated individually. That there's broad rules of thumb, but really each one should be looked at separately. The annual appeal that's sent at the end of the year is generally very clearly a request for supporting the ongoing operations of the organization. And sponsorships and paddle raising often are targeted to specific needs within the organization. So you want to provide people the opportunity to support the annual operating. Be sensitive to what they've done. If you know that their paddle raise in November is a significant gift for them, you may hold off. You may just send them a thank you. If you know that they have much more capacity and they've maybe historically given you a year in, then you would go out and send it. It really should be as individualized as possible, and given the fact that the donors that you're talking about are probably known because of the size of their giving, you should do that. Anything to add, Mary?
No, I wholeheartely agree that as individualized for those donors, and if you don't know who those donors are, maybe you query your system for anybody that's given in the last 3 months, and then try to individualize them based on their giving patterns if you don't know them, personally. So again, bite-sized pieces. And then, I would just urge you to look at the giving pattern. The other thing I would say too is, year end it's an interesting time of year because, and I get this question because some donors, they've given throughout the year, but when they're receiving pieces of mail from all these other nonprofits, then it looks like your organization is missing, and they're like, wow, I haven't received anything from this organization, and so there's really both sides of the coin, and so that's why it's critical to look at each donor individually and their giving history for your higher level donors.
And someone actually has a comment to this question. This person says, this is a really great question. Our organization decides to ask again, and some of their donors have historically given twice that year between October and December. And then the question that this person has, I wonder similarly about monthly donors, would the answer be the same? So should you send an appeal to a monthly donor?
Presumably, the monthly donor created that giving pattern as a result of an annual giving program. That would be my assumption. But it can never hurt to send a special request at the end of the year, kind of honoring the holiday season and providing that opportunity for them while honoring the fact that they're one of your most loyal donors.
Yeah, I agree, Wendy. I think as long as you can, tell, like in the solicitation, you can say, we know and so appreciate that you're a monthly donor, but it's the season of giving, and if you felt so inspired, we want to give you that opportunity. So even just recognizing communicates so much more, like that that you're tracking and you're thinking about that particular donor.
Great. Okay, I have a number of other questions I want to get to, so I'm going to kind of switch gears. This question is in reference to the grid that you just had up, Mary, on the previous screen.
Oh, sure.
And the question is, how do you assign value in the grid to the number of first-time donors? One of the benefits of a Giving Tuesday campaign is that it can attract first-time donors.
Ooh, I love this question so much. So, yes, I agreed, absolutely. So I like this grid. I tend to add several additional columns and kind of slice it and dice it in different ways. But one thing I would urge you to do is to look at things over multiple years. So these 16 donors that Giving Tuesday brought in, look at how they behave. They're going to be thrown into your communication mix. They're going to receive your newsletters. They're going to receive your emails, and invitations to events. See how they give over the next year or two, or maybe you can even, Giving Tuesday's been around a couple years now. Query for last year's new Giving Tuesday donors and have they stuck around. So, and I would urge you to do that with every single one of these appeals. Like it could be its own column of, does this produce one and done donors, or is this true pipeline building? And so that is a fabulous question. I probably could write a novella about it. So I hope that answers your question, although I feel like I could keep going for a while. So
Great.
Thank you. Great question.
Great. And a few more very sort of specific questions, but and Mary, maybe this is for you as well. But how do you track which appeal someone replied to? So many folks will receive a letter and then an e-news, maybe a dedicated email. How do you know which apply it was that their gift was in response to?
Another great question.
Yeah. So
code everything. Code, like if you're sending out an e-newsletter, and if it were me, I would track because I track everything, but I would track the clicks in each of those. But then on the back end, on your database side, the link that's in that newsletter should lead to a specific page that has a code in your database. So any gifts that are made on that particular page would have some sort of appeal code. The other thing is any piece of mail, any reply device that you produce, everything should have a code that corresponds to an appeal in your database. It's another reason why it's so important to code everything you sent out. So if the donor we're talking about received year-end mailing number 1, and he or she didn't give, but then they got the double drop, but then they gave to the e-newsletter because they got an email and thought, oh gosh, I've received 2 letters, but I'm here, I'm online, I'm just going to go and make a gift. I would code it to the actual thing that got the donor to either write a check or make a gift online. And there's all kinds of data on the backside that you can crunch, early in the year too. When people got mailings, did they go online? Did they make their gift online? Did they mail it in? Did they wait till they received a newsletter? And these are things that will help you build out next year. Like, oh, after mailing number 1, maybe we need to time our newsletters to go out, 8 days after our mailing hits households. And then we'll see if we even need to do a double drop if the e-newsletter, inspired people in this example. So there's a lot there to track, but every appeal, even online, and your e-newsletters should have some sort of code that ties back to a specific appeal in your database.
And this is just a follow-up question, Mary, but if there isn't a current coding system, is that something, how high on the priority list is that? So now it's mid-October, is this a must-do for this year?
If you haven't printed your mailings, then I would do it. If you're in the top 3 that we've talked about, like the Razor's Edge, Donor Perfect, and Salesforce, these, and even if you're not, all the databases have some sort of functionality. So I think if you haven't printed, then I would build a code. It'll take you 5 minutes, and then put that code, tell the printer, put this code on my reply devices. So when it comes back with a check, I know which appeal to code it to.
Great. That's
I would say it's a must, because then if you don't do it this year, then you have a whole nother year of not knowing how things fared.
Right. And to your point in your presentation earlier about carving out time to debrief after the year end this year to make sure and get systems in place for next year that perhaps you didn't have in place this year. So doing everything you can this year, but then also just making sure to invest that time in January to really figure out lessons learned from this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, more questions. Do you recommend a straight letter or more of a newsletter format or a printed piece with photos? So do either of you have suggestions or tips or ideas about what the best format is for a year-end appeal?
This is Wendy. Direct mail fundraising it's a dwindling art, but it certainly is still fairly significant for many organizations. And many of the studies show that a straight letter is the best approach. There are difference of opinions about whether a shorter one-page letter is good or a much longer letter is good. But most of the studies agree that anything you add to it, short of just bullet points and maybe a photo, can dilute the fundraising response to it. That every little lift note, every brochure you put with it, can dilute the fact that it's a specific request for an annual gift. We often have these conversations with clients because they do have beautiful material, wonderful pictures, the opportunity to print some lovely newsletters or giving brochures. And we encourage them for that. If you are specifically and only asking for a gift with that particular mailing, that doing a straight letter is preferable. I'll be interested to see if you have the same thoughts, Mary.
You know, I do. I haven't actually met, you know, I'm data driven probably to a fault, but I haven't measured, you know, what's been more successful in the past. Like, is it this certain string of activities, you know, like a hard mailing and then an email follow-up and then you know, someone's added to the phone-a-thon list. But I do know that direct mail, like when we do Alford analytics for our clients, direct mail, like that actual piece of mail that asks someone to give with a reply device, is by far the most successful tactic when we look at giving histories going back 5 or 7 years.
Great, that is excellent. So we have time for just one, maybe two more questions. And one question goes, we touched on monthly giving already, and the question's related to that, so maybe we could expand a little bit. But the question is, what are some best practices around acknowledging monthly givers, and how should they be handled at the end of the year?
So Wendy, I'll chime in first, and you probably have some creative ideas too. So when you have a monthly giver, you know, you don't want to send a monthly acknowledgement, and they don't want you to send that either. They don't want you to take that postage money and printing money and time out of the gift that they've just given you. So what I like to do is, I like when they first sign up for monthly giving, I like to send a letter, you know, a personalized letter, and hand sign it and say, you know, we know you've signed up for monthly giving, and what we're going to do is every January we're going to send you a one-pager that details all of your giving from the previous year, and you'll have that for your tax receipts. But in the meantime, we've put you into our, you know, our e-newsletter list, and you're going to get our newsletters in the mailing, and this is my contact information. So if you need anything, you know, any kind of receipts throughout the year, or you don't want to receive just one, let me know. But at least it acknowledges that you're not going to mail them every month, which I do really think most would appreciate. And then it allows you to also steward them in a way that gives two-way dialogue. So they can tell you, they can say, yeah, I'd like to receive something quarterly, and that's okay too.
I agree with that, Mary. I mean, your monthly donors are some of your most loyal supporters, so you want to respect the amount of communication that they desire. But I think also once or twice a year, making a quick phone call or sending a special impact message specifically to them, acknowledging that they are some of your most loyal supporters.
Great.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you both. We are very quickly running out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap us up. But thank you, Wendy and Mary, for all of this information. There are a lot of questions that we just didn't have time to get to. And if we weren't able to answer your question, please feel free to contact us. So Mary, if you head to the final slide, our contact information is here for everyone. And really, please feel free to give us a call or send us an email. So thank you. We hope that you've picked up some ideas and tips that will be helpful. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of our webinars are available on demand on our website. And our website is alford.com. And today's presentation is going to be posted there as well. So keep an eye out for an email later today with a link to the recording of today's webinar, the full slide deck, and just a very short 4-question survey where you can tell us how we did. So thank you everyone so much for joining. This concludes today's webinar, and we will now disconnect. Have a really great day.